Hello, everybody. My name is Gabriel Claassen. I work as a program manager at African Climate Alliance, and I also work at Project 90 by 2030. Today, I'm going to be your space holder and someone helping you understand a little bit more about consultation and help build your capacity for consultation, especially in build up to the climate change bill consultations that have been happening across South Africa. For those who haven't yet seen it, in the chat is the data reimbursement form. I've popped it again. There we are. For those wanting to do a check-in, it would be lovely if you could please share. I see quite a few people have done it, your name and where you're calling in from. It would just be great to know. Cool. Are you based in Cape Town? Are you based, in Joburg? Where are you based? Are you based in, Zambia? Because today's session, while it talks to the climate change bill, and the climate change bill is specific to South Africa, decisions that get made in one province or one country they don't end at the border. They impact the way that the rest of the continent and other countries neighboring as well are affected. And so today we're going to dive in a bit of a discussion. We're joined by Brandon Abdenor from the Center for Environmental Rights. Thank you once again, Brandon, for always swooping in and helping guide us on the technicalities that come about, especially when it comes to curating messages. So it's really great to have you, Brandon.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Here we go. Excellent. And then we'll have Wandile Jonas from Project 90 by 2030, who offers a bit of lived experience and as well as the importance of youth engagement for this in-person consultation. Wandile, thank you for being a part of today's meeting. Hopefully network isn't too bad, Wandile. But I'll trust you.
Thanks, Gabe.
Awesome. Cool. So what we're going to do is just dive into a little bit of an opening kind of just discussion around kind of the what consultation is, what consultation can lead to, and then move into Wandile sharing, Brandon sharing first, but more about the climate change bill, and then we'll move into Wandile talking about the importance of engaging this before we start curating some talking points that I think would be very crucial for us all to engage and just not even engage, but take forward. Just because I do believe that if we don't kind of come out of this with a little bit of we don't come out of this with a little bit of a direction, it might have been a wasted opportunity and a missed opportunity at that. And so we're gonna just jump into a little bit of a kind of description of this, and then I'll pass to you, Brandon, for a bit of a breakdown on where we find ourselves right now with the climate change bill and where we're going to. A bit of a roadmap, so to speak, and important points to highlight. And then Wandile, I'll pass to you to describe just a little bit about youth and the seat at the table that they find themselves at. Building our capacity for consultation. So today's kind of a little bit about that, but it's mainly focusing on the climate change bill and the heaviness that comes around with that. Today's workshop is also a collaboration between Center for Environmental Rights and Project 90 by 2030. And so it's about diving into how you having your say can have an impact on the broader space of climate action in the country and across the space. So diving into it first is, what is public consultation? So a rough idea of it is public consultation is a means to improving democratic governance through cross-sector engagement on key elements, policies, and more. And so a big part to remember is that when we start talking with each other and engaging each other like this is a form of consultation. It's a form of public consultation, because I, as Gabriel, Brandon, and Wandile are here to kind of engage you and consult you and hear what your thoughts are, but also assist you in developing your own messages that are from your own authentic voice, with a key focus on certain items that might ring relevant within your kind of formal consultation. But it's basically a way to improve the democratic side of governance and decision making. There are different types of public consultation. It's written consultation. So many of you have participated before when we've written submissions, not only for the climate change bill, but written submissions for the Western Cape climate change response strategy, when we've written things for the PCC, Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan, and more. And And then obviously conferences and more. Many of you have participated in many online conferences across the continent, international conferences and more. These count as consultations if they're framed as that. And if, I mean, there's also a bit of a, I'll get to it in the next slide. It's just a variation of what people view as consultation and what is actually a lecture series. And so then moving to meetings with interest groups, which is what the group facilitating the government is doing with the climate change bill, meeting with different communities, different demographics, different stakeholders to properly engage them and hopefully reflect some of what they have to say about the documents, policies, and more in their final submissions. Whether or not it makes it there or not is another conversation. But the hope is that it really is reflective of the people's needs and the people's wants, and that it draws out an action plan, not only for people to be implementers, because I hate that when people say, you are now an implementer, but I didn't come up with the idea, but rather a collaborator in the motion. Others are workshops, much like this as well as interviews. And that doesn't mean just like online kind of news interviews, but public consultation can count as someone who has a form of interest in what you have got to say or your perspective and engaging you on that. There obviously needs to be a certain level of ethics to make sure that it's not just your voice being misrepresented in this space. And so those are few forms of public consultation. And so now you get active consultation and you get passive consultation. And there's probably many, many other types, but in my mind, that's how I want to describe it to you today. Passive consultation is when things find themselves to be one-way streets. This item over here, this little drawing over here, it's where I've come to talk to you, and that's it. I'm here to tell you this is what you need to do, this is what we've done, and move on. That's what it is. But what people don't seem to realize is that consultation, by definition, is a discussion. It's learning about what's needed to improve something. It's basically going back to improving democratic. Democratic is not just like me to you, but you to me as well. Governance through cross-sector engagement. And so right now we find ourselves in this bit of a spiral where public participation is very much a group, a government entity or something else coming in and saying, cool, I'm here to consult you, to hear what you have to say, but I'm not actually going to hear what you have to say because I'll leave 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. And then I'll take in what I think I want from you. Where in fact, what public consultation is I'm passing something on. I'm hearing your feedback, coming back to you with it again. And there's many contested kind of ideas of if that's even the real option that should be happening. Should it not be from the beginning of an idea, you're consulted, and then it begins to move into draft phase, and then it begins a back and forth. But I suppose we can only hope that it's a two-way street. So public consultation in South Africa is also a constitutional right. It is. And if I'm not the right Brandon, jump in there. But to my knowledge, it is. And meaningful and fully informed consultation is also something that we and in South Africa, that I do many other places around the world, aren't privy to that. Don't have. Honestly speaking, it's quite sad. But that's not something that many countries value in their kind of new forms of democracy and also not democracy. So yeah, it's just I'm here to talk to you. But in South Africa, it's in our constitution that we have the right to engage in those public forums and constitutions, in consultations, to properly have our voice and our needs heard. And so that's just something I want to highlight. And I want you to remember that going through not only today's session, but the different consultative spaces that you end up going into, not only a part of the climate change bill, but or today, but the actual formal consultation that happens not only in the Western Cape, but also across the other provinces. I know quite a few of them already happened. But in the future, there will be other opportunities for you to engage as well. Why is consultation so crucial when it comes to social and environmental justice? Here are just a few points, and I want you to start thinking about this as well as we start curating resources around how we as young people individuals who identify as women and other affected and most affected communities, under-resourced and underrepresented communities, what we want to see in kind of these kind of spaces. And so why is it so important in the social environment when it comes to social and environmental justice? Well, decisions have oftentimes been made without most affected communities, youth and women at the table to even begin with. Not only at the table, but also in mind. Oftentimes it's a very patriarchal system where women and the needs and the struggles of women and the injustices women face aren't taken properly into consultation or taken into proper mind when something is being drafted. The effects on youth, the fact that youth aren't viewed as individuals who can properly and positively engage in subject matter is a problem. The fact that these documents are so highbrow and filled with jargon, big words, and topics that aren't properly discussed and broken down is a problem. It leaves it to individuals like Brandon from the Center for Environmental Rights to come through and break down these topics, to make it more accessible for young people to engage, and for these spaces to kind of have glossaries almost. And so that's one of the reasons. Oftentimes, these most affected groups are not at the table for the decisions that get made, which means when we're there, we oftentimes find out what we're getting ourselves into or what they've gotten us into after it's already been done. And then we are left to either pick up the pieces or become implementers of their plans and ideas. Moving on, its decisions today can deeply and will deeply impact our present and our future. And so when we talk about how public consultation and consultation in general deeply impacts system change or social and environmental justice and economic justice as well, but when we talk about how the justice element is present there, we see that if we don't have proper and meaningful and fully informed consultation, we end up spiraling in these spaces where it's like, wow, so not only do we not have a say about our today, we don't have a say about it tomorrow, because these decisions are oftentimes long lasting. It's not just a period of a year cycle. These things are oftentimes, when they go into motion, they stay into motion for quite a long time. And then, it's supposed to be, opportunities for you to engage it properly and review it over a certain period of time. But those periods of time, the reviews aren't often, reviewing opportunities are not often there. We've seen it with the integrated resource plan here in South Africa, where you're supposed to begin reviewing that and editing it as it moves, but we aren't really doing that. And many other forms of public policy and more. Then understanding how crucial your voice is in decision-making spaces, in the decision-making space, is the first step to bringing about change in it. And so when we talk about social and environmental justice, we talk about the fact that you at the core, when we talk about intersectionality, you at the core, people and planet at the core, need to be able to understand how their voice actually plays a deep role. Even saying, I don't agree because it doesn't work, and because I don't fully understand, that in itself is you putting forward a submission, you consulting. So if something is not properly translated, if you feel like you aren't properly capacitated to be a part of that engagement, you vocalizing that is also a crucial point in consultation spaces. It helps the decision maker, so to speak, understand what you and the people in your community are facing. It also helps bring forward a bit of change, because not only is it noted there, but now other individuals who are feeling the same way that you are recognizing the fact that you actually aren't going to sit idly back and enjoy things and let just all the nonsense fly. And so I think that there's just a few points about why consultation is so crucial when it comes to social and environmental justice, when it comes to being a change maker, when it comes to engaging in the space. Then moving on, Brandon, warm up yourself. So what is the climate change bill? The climate change bill, and why are we talking about it today? So the climate change bill is a framework piece of legislation that, if passed as an act, is intended to govern South Africa's climate change response strategy at a high level. It is meant to be the master plan of how we mitigate, which is stop something before it gets worse, and adapt, which is change things and adapt to things as, or basically, I can't use adapt in the, and so how we move and how we cope with something in the moment as it's happening, to climate change impacts. So following the adoption of this bill, other regulations will be made and formed to ensure that the objectives set out within it are met properly, which means basically that the bill is a master plan that sits there, and underneath that bill, underneath that, once the act is put forward, the act is there, and things are moved forward, then other regulations will then start flowing in to make sure that all the things that it says within that master plan are actually rolled out. And so while some people have said, well, the document doesn't properly represent this, doesn't properly represent that, we shouldn't have a climate change bill at all. And Brandon, maybe you can talk about that as well. We shouldn't have a climate change bill at all, because a bad bill is worse than a good, is worse than a no bill at all. But what does that mean for other forms of legislation that are being pushed through, like gas master plan and more? And so we're gonna have to kind of use a bit of thinking around this today, especially after we hear and see what Brandon has to share, just as to where we find ourselves with the bill and more. So yeah, just the reason that we're talking about it is, we would have loved to do it sooner, but I also know that the Center for Environmental Rights has been building the capacity of communities and youth across the rest of South Africa as well. And given African Climate Alliance and Project 90 by 2030's larger base being in the Western Cape, and that the fact that in May, I believe the 19th, 20 something, something, I'll get the proper dates and I'll share them in the chat and also verbalize them again later. But on the 19th of May, for example, there will be a formal consultation by the government on the climate change bill in Khayelitsha, which is a township, a community in Cape Town, South Africa, where Project 90 has a majority of youth that engage in their program, their climate and social justice program, the U-Lead initiative, which is why Wandile is here later on to share a little bit about the importance of youth and engaging in these spaces at the table. Well, enough about me. Brandon, just a little bit of a look at that. This is Brandon smiling all nice on the screen. I stole his photo from the CER's website. So Brandon is a climate advocacy lawyer from the Center for Environmental Rights. He's an all amazing guy who's constantly tried to build the capacity of not only young people. I'm making your own bio up here. Who's not only tried to build the capacity of communities, but continues to strengthen the capacity and provide tools to young people so that they can act on their own empowerment. Brandon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thanks again for the invite. I must say, I always find it very rewarding to participate with ACA on these things, to engage with the colleagues and comrades, and also to just enjoy your amazing space holding. And I can't stand that photo, just for the record.
I saw it and I was like, Brandon will probably hate this. Let me use it.
Okay, let me also call up my presentation. Okay, so the intention here is to interweave a little bit with some of the things that Gabriel spoke around participation and how they relate to this particular bill, and then to go into the bill itself in a little bit of detail. And Gabriel, I really like the way you framed the framework just now. I think that says it very well. That's exactly what this bill is and what the eventual Climate Change Act will be, hopefully. Just one point on what Gabriel said earlier as well. So consultation and public participation are rights, but they are rights that many in power do not particularly want to give a lot of space to. We often have situations where those decision makers decide what they want, and then they treat this public participation and consultation process as a tick box exercise. Another thing that's interesting is that public participation is for a large part, not really well defined. So it's through our engagement with these things, it's through becoming involved in public participations and consultations, we get to push the envelope. We get to push this democratic right, it's democracy in action, into the direction that we want it to be. And we've seen that, or I've seen that in my experience, how a lot of public participation processes around environmental impact assessments and so on were really treated like a tick box. They were shocking. You get someone who's maybe an expert in their field going up, putting a presentation, blah, 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 and kind of walking off, and they would tick the box. And through pushing constantly by civil society, by people like ourselves, we're starting to force that to be a more meaningful thing. It's not the silver bullet yet, but so that's why it's important to do it and to raise these issues. If you feel that things aren't being translated properly, or the terminology is deliberately going over everybody's heads, is to stop the process and say that this is not actually covering what I need, and this does not mean meaningful consultation to me. Those are the dates just for interest. So on the 21st to the 23rd, we've got the public hearings in the Eastern Cape province, 5th to the 7th of May in the Free State, Northern Cape's the 12th to the 14th, and then, as Gabriel correctly said, in the Western Cape, which is the last round of hearings for the bill in this phase anyway, they happen from the 19th to the 21st. So I can also make this presentation available, Gabriel, afterwards, and yeah. That information is also, so we've set up a microsite that is focused very much on the bill, and in due course will be populated with more sort of climate law related issues. And on that bill, and that's the address there, there's a toolkit, and a lot of what I'll be talking about this evening comes from that toolkit, especially around the concerns around the bill. For interest, there's also an animated video and fact sheets. So if you are interested and this calls you and you want to sort of spread the word, those are great tools. They're in a few different languages, and they really break down what the bill is, what the concerns are, what the bill needs to be in very simple and accessible form. So by all means, go have a look there, and you can use that stuff to your heart's content. So this bill, and a bill is a draft law, and the bill is eventually going to become an act once it's approved by Parliament, is really more urgent than ever. And some of the reasons I say that is the science keeps on coming in. We've just had the synthesis report, or the sort of consolidated report from the IPCC, that's the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that is really the scientific body which is supposed to gather the scientific evidence from around the world. And they look at sometimes up to 10,000 papers written by scientists from around the world. They gather that information and they come to the global scientific view on climate change. So it's a very credible source. I mean, each of those reports have up to 300 authors from around the world. And the science that keeps coming in, unfortunately, keeps telling us the situation is a little bit more severe than we thought, a little bit more intense than the last report. So the science keeps backing us up. It's not that it's ever gotten to a point that says, okay, well, we've been overreacting a bit. Unfortunately, the severity of the crisis is becoming more well known. The impacts only get bigger. We know what happened in eThekwini last year with the floods, which is strongly linked to climate change. We know what happened in Cape Town with the Day Zero drought, and so on. They just keep rolling in. And again, the science tells us that we can expect that to be a trend. The politics around this is very tricky and a very contested space. We just need to look at the energy politics in South Africa today, and climate change is the football that gets kicked around in those political games, and in the same breath, it's our futures and our lives that get kicked around in that way. I joked with some colleagues today, you know, there's photos of kind of homemade wiring, electrical wiring, where it looks like spaghetti. That could be a diagram of our energy policy at this point in time. And obviously something like load shedding, it pours fuel on that fire, and it allows for opportunists to really start trying to push things in their direction. We've actually had quite a strong, we feel it's slow and it's not ambitious enough, but there has been this steady move in policy towards getting South Africa to a sound climate response space. Now with this load shedding and the new electricity minister suggesting we don't phase out coal so quickly, we can see how this football is being kicked around. Although him and the president did say today that no, they didn't really mean it. And anyway, we'll hope that they sort it out in time. And it's through public participation from the likes of ourselves that keep that pressure on. And we mustn't underestimate that pressure that we can apply. I'm often sometimes amazed at who's heard what and taken it on board. So it might feel like sometimes your voice is small, but say it. Every drop goes into the ocean and the changes eventually happen. There are a lot of governance challenges. I mean, we know that in general and around the climate change space. For example, climate change is within the domain of the Ministry of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. But the biggest cause of climate change comes from things within the energy sector, for example. So we can see the competition there and the different power centers pulling in different directions sometimes. Vested interests and corruption, something that really touches all of our lives all around the world. We sometimes think that South Africa must be the worst, but it certainly isn't. But it's a challenge with the kinds of political systems we have, the kind of economic systems we have, and where the power sits. So those vested interests are an issue. And in South Africa, I mean, just to name it quite bluntly, one of those, for example, is the coal lobby. So we do have a lot of business and political interest in coal. It's coal mining, it's the contracts to Eskom, et cetera, et cetera. And those kinds of vested interests are what can get in the way. And having the right legislation in place, having a strong climate change act can start to put those things in their right place. And then the vulnerability increases. Climate change is this perfect storm that interacts with poverty and inequality and unemployment and challenged human settlements and all of these things. So whatever these existing challenges are, climate change just comes on top of it and kind of amps it up. So another reason why we need a strong climate change act as soon as possible. So just to give you a quick idea, this is the process of a bill. So the bill gets drafted. In this case, it was drafted by the department using consultants as well. And it then gets approved by cabinet. So that happened. It then goes to the portfolio committee. So the portfolio committee is a group of parliamentarians in the National Assembly or at the national level who sit and make up different portfolio committees. And there's a portfolio committee on environment, forestry, and fisheries as well, just as there is on energy, transports, health, and so on. And this is where the bill is sitting at the moment. So the portfolio committee's got around 13 MPs. The makeup will be more or less along the lines of the kind of seats in parliament. So most of the committee members are ANC, and then there's some DA and I think one EFF, IFP, and so on. And they're the body who sit and actually usher this bill through its process. And they are hosting the hearings that we're talking about this evening. Once that happens, once the last one in the Western Cape has happened at the end of May, then in all likelihood, it will go to the provincial parliament, if you like, or the National Council of Provinces, because this particular bill has an impact on the national and on provincial. It goes through these two stages, and there's probably going to be another public participation process through the provinces. The ambitions of the portfolio committee is that will then be complete, and this whole process will be complete by around September. If there are any changes to be made, and we'll talk about what changes we think should be made, those changes will be made and it'll go back to Parliament, who must approve the changes. And if they do, then the president can sign it into law. And then it becomes the Climate Change Act. So from my side anyway, there's certainly a lot of space for Q&A at the end. So anything that's not sitting well, or you're not sure about, or is making you think of additional things, please note them down, and I'd be more than happy to chat about them. Okay, so the input at the hearings is an opportunity to share your views, opinions, concerns, and objections. This is democracy. This is your space. There are some guidelines, and I'll go through them, but it's the place where you get to say what you want to say about climate change in this case, about the way it's going to be regulated, about concerns, whether it will be regulated well enough, etc., etc. This is the place to say it. And you can say these things in the tone and language of your choice. Obviously, literally the language of your choice, but also how you want to say it. You know, sometimes at these hearings can be a bit intimidating. You've got the people presenting it in technical language. You've maybe got a few experts sitting around and they're answering in technical language, and the whole thing feels like it's out there. There are no such things as silly statements or questions. So you can ask these things in the simplest terms. I come from a water scarce area. Please explain to me how this bill is going to help protect our water sources from climate harm. And it's your opportunity to propose changes. So this is where you can say, you may have had a look at the bill, you may have heard something in this presentation today or somewhere else that is concern to you, and you can say it then and there. I think this should be in the bill, or I don't like that thing in the bill. Can we take it out? It's the opportunity to do that. So, and you can tell your story, whatever that may be, your context, your life, your experiences, your concerns. This is the place to say them. You can describe your circumstances. So the portfolio committee, they're quite interesting. They're elected officials. So they've got an interest in being in touch with their constituency, or with voters, or the people that they rule. They're a bit different to the executive. So the people at the department, they're quite sort of technical. They've got a job to do, and they can seem quite unapproachable. Whereas the parliamentarians on the portfolio committee can be surprisingly approachable. And whatever you say to them is what they using what people say to gauge the mood of the country, and to gauge people's feelings and the mood around climate change and the regulation of climate change in this case. While you can say anything you want, it is important and valuable to keep the comment relevant to the bill. So I think we don't have enough democracy in this country. So you'll often have something, you know, a forum like this that's established to discuss climate change, and someone will come up and talk about the littering in their area, which is understandable because they're not getting voice to those things. It's not a climate related issue per se. So keeping it relevant to climate change and to the bill is just going to make sure that your input's more valuable. I say they keep an appropriately respectful tone. That's not to say that if you're feeling emotional or angry or upset or scared about these things, that you can't express that. And in fact, that sends a really powerful message when the portfolio committee can see authentic expression from people. So you don't want to shout or name call, obviously, because, you know, if one gets to that point, then unfortunately your message gets kind of disregarded along with that behavior, and you might get asked to leave. So, but don't hold back if something's making you angry, for example, or concerned or upset. And then, yeah, it's just, obviously it's not even practical or possible where every input ends up getting taken into account. And obviously a lot of the inputs sometimes counter each other, but your input will have value no matter what, whether it ends up changing the bill or whether it lands in the minds of a portfolio committee member who 2 years down the line does something appropriate or educates the person next to you. Whatever you say has value. So do not hold back from saying it. In terms of honing in a little bit and sort of weaving nicely into some of the things that Gabriel said, for this to be meaningful, the hearings should be conducted in a spirit of listening. So obviously you can't go in there and kind of change the minds of people who don't want to listen, but you can ask for your space. If you get shushed or talked over, you can demand your right to speak. Interpreters and translators should be provided. And if you are speaking in a different language and the interpreter is not conveying what you're saying properly, you can object. You can actually make the point again and say, look, this is not being interpreted correctly. I've seen that happen, and I've seen from one meeting to the next where they brought an interpreter who didn't understand any of the issues and consequently couldn't facilitate a good hearing. At the next meeting, they brought someone versed in the subject. So pushing these things in the right direction can have good results. You can ask for things to be made accessible and understandable in language that is not too technical. So if they are like saying things very technical, you can say, can you please break that down for me in very simple terms? And that will also get their minds into a place where they start to communicate in a manner that's meaningful for everybody involved. And whatever questions you ask, views you express, and objections need to be recorded by law and made publicly available. So by raising an objection, for example, you actually, again, it's going into the record. Might or might not result in change, but it's got meaning, it's got weight, and it's always worth doing. So I'm going to now run through some of the points around the bill itself. These are all in the toolkit that's on that website. We'll put up the URL at the end again. And the idea is, it's, for me to get to this point where I can share our concerns around the bill, our team has done research for years looking at climate change acts around the world, looking at academic reports, et cetera, and really getting a sense of what works and what doesn't. And the toolkit and the points in this toolkit and what I'll run through come out of that. So that's our view. And many agree with us and think that our views are valuable, but that might not necessarily align with your own view. And that's the importance of this, is if any of these issues speak to you in such a way that you feel you'd also like to advocate for them, then go for it. If they don't align with you, then leave them. Or they might even help you get to an opposite opinion, and that's good as well. So the important point here is we are not trying to tell you what to think and what to say and what input to make around the bill, but just offer you some possibilities and explanations which you can then use if they align with you. So these are the points that I would recommend and that I'll make. And yes.
Just wanting to note that we will also share, like Brandon did say in the beginning of his presentation, that we will share this as well at the end. So don't rush to write down things. If you can make a small note like, hey, you want to get access to that, but we will share the presentation and the recording afterward as well.
Good point. Yeah, thanks, Gabriel. So I'd say one of the most important things to raise at hearings or around this bill is just to express support for the very existence of the bill. And the thing is that there are people out there from a range of different mindsets that don't necessarily want a climate change act. There are those emitters who don't want to be regulated. They want to carry on with business as usual and their climate harming activities. There are those who don't want any government control, and they think this is a conspiracy and it's going to be used to tax them, or I don't know, whatever the case is. I've seen some pretty crazy stuff out there. So just sending the signal to the portfolio committee that you appreciate the bill and you want an act and you want it soon, the urgency of it, alone is a powerful message to send out there, because the committee is going to go around the country to these hearings and just note all the different inputs. So we want more people to be saying yes, please, than people saying no, thanks. Then another concern we have with the bill is, and it's a concern that one really can levy across different activities and different legislation, but in this case in particular, is access to information and transparency. Climate change is such a broad issue. It's going to touch everybody's lives and every sector and every kind of region and the way we do things. And we've got choices to make and plans and responses to have to bring in. And to do those things properly, we need to have information. If we don't have information, we kind of floundering around in the dark. We're susceptible to being lied to, misled, etc., etc. So the more information that is available, the better. And we know this from our work with working with air pollution, especially in the Mpumalanga Highveld, how we really have to battle to get anything, Eskom's reports, the government's reports on Eskom, etc., etc. So to ask for it to be in the bill and to be strong from the start is going to help all of us. We need to know information around the emitters. So who's emitting what? Who the big greenhouse gas emitters that are causing the issues? What are they doing to change it? What steps are they taking? What are their plans? Are they meeting their plans and their own targets? Are they meeting the government's targets? So information around emissions and emitters. Right now, the bill has a lot of limitations. It basically says any information that anyone provides to the minister should be made publicly available in terms of PIA and POPIA. So for those of you that don't know, PIA is the Promotion of Access to Information Act, and POPIA is the Protection of Personal Information Act. And both of those pieces of legislation, which are generally very good, allow people to not disclose information on certain grounds, including that my information is commercially sensitive, so you can't have it. And that can get very abused. So we're not comfortable with those kind of limitations on the information the way it's currently put. The information should be put out there. It should be easily accessible and understandable. Now, I think it's in Guatemala. They've actually got a website. The government's got a website that's got all climate change related information on there. What the different plans are, what the targets are, how everyone's performing. And that would be the gold standard. If we could have something like that where everyone can access everything and it's understandable and digestible, that's going to be a win for democracy. The government does publish a greenhouse gas inventory report. So that says what the greenhouse gas emissions are and where they come from, but it doesn't name the companies. It just talks about the sectors. But I think it's like 400 pages and it's extremely complicated. So yes, you need that level of complexity at the back, but why not put a front end on it of the simple summarized stuff so that everybody can say, you know, Sasol, they emit a lot, they're causing a lot of trouble, but they're sticking with their plan, they're going in the right direction. We can for now be comfortable that Sasol's doing the right thing, or they're not fitting, we've got to put more pressure on them. Climate adaptation plan. So every municipality, every province needs to come up with a climate adaptation plan. The country comes up with one as well. So it's really important, we feel, that people know what's in that climate adaptation plan, because it touches everybody's lives. So for example, towns in the Western Cape, one of the expected climate impacts can be less water and more drought. So one wants to know that one's municipality has got a plan that is properly recognizing those impacts and putting the right sort of steps in place. Let's ban the building of new swimming pools. Let's spend money replenishing our wetlands so the water goes into the ground and is preserved that way, whatever it might be. So those plans should be publicly available. And as I say, at the bottom, on an accessible information platform would be the first prize. The climate crisis is urgent. We know we need to be taking steep emissions reduction steps, ideally 25 years ago, but at least starting today. And unfortunately, the really important tools in the bill. So that's the carbon budget. So the carbon budget is the one that says, Sasol, for example, you may not emit more than X million tons of CO2 per year. And the bill talks about establishing those carbon budgets, but it doesn't have a time frame in it. Now, we know that the current minister, Minister Creasy, and the department are working on these things in the background. But what if there was a cabinet reshuffle or someone else comes in and they're not as committed to climate action? And then if you don't have a deadline in the bill, it can legally be left for years and years. I'm sure we would take them to court, but it's better to have the deadlines in the bill and prevent the need for that fight. So on the mitigation, there are no deadlines where they need to be. And on the adaptation side, the timeframes and deadlines are weak. Now, we understand it's not easy stuff to come up with adaptation plans. But at the same time, at this stage, a municipality only needs to come up with its adaptation plan 5 years after the act comes into being. There's not time for that. Sure, you can have a more refined plan in 5 years, but let's start thinking about climate change early, and even if we get preliminary plans in place. Part of what this bill needs to do, I mean, Gabriel mentioned at the outset, it's mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the impact on the climate, and adaptation. And the third leg of the bill is the institutional arrangement. So that's which parts of government need to do what in this whole picture. And we think that a strong bill would ensure that there are a lot of responsibilities and timeframes and deliverables for all the different organs of state and role players involved. We think the bill could be stronger with scientifically sound targets. So we like to keep bringing it back to the science. The science tells us we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030. If we keep those basic science prescripts in mind and in place, it kind of keeps an ongoing pressure on government to make the right choices. The bill does not provide for an independent scientific body, unlike some of the better climate change acts around the world. And we're saying that maybe that should be in there. Someone that's free of the politics, that just looks at the science, the climate science, the biology, the water science, et cetera, and comes up with an objective, sound, and safe benchmark that government should then adhere to. And then this is probably our biggest concern around the current bill, is penalties, compliance, and enforcement. So we're saying this bill needs to have teeth. So what's intended at the moment is that the carbon budgets will be allocated. So for example, again, Sasol, and I use them because they're the largest private emitter in the country, just as an example, needs to not emit more than 350, whatever it is. And what's currently intended is if they emit more, then they will be subject to a higher carbon tax. Okay, that's in itself not a terrible idea, because that means there's more money that comes in that should be used for climate response. But as they themselves said at a meeting with Treasury last year, we might decide that we'll just pay the tax and keep emitting. So they basically, because they have deep pockets, decide they want to carry on emitting excessive greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's nothing anyone can do. So we're saying make excessive greenhouse gas emissions a penalty or an offense, and then the government will have the power to not only tax them on it, but eventually prohibit them from doing that. And that's essential, because the truth is, and I don't want to pick on any one particular company, the big emitters make a lot of money out of their big emissions, directly or indirectly, and they don't want to change. So climate action, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, in most cases means a lot more pressure on their profits. So without the teeth to really force them to start to look at doing things differently, they probably won't, is the sad reality. And here we can single out fossil fuel companies in general. We think that the bill needs to ensure an all-of-government approach. So we don't want a situation where Minister Creasy's department is fighting all the rest of government to do the right thing around climate change. If it can be strengthened so that there's parliamentary oversight, that there's budget made available to all the different sectors and departments, that all decision makers must comply with targets. Right now, we have a situation where we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, in theory at least, and then other departments, maybe in the provinces, are approving huge emitting projects. So we need that to be bound, all of them to be bound by the bill. And as I said, parliamentary oversight and reporting to Parliament. Okay, so just to summarize, the really key points that we think would be good to highlight at hearings is, yes, we want the act and we want it urgently. We want the deadlines and timeframes to be in there so that it's urgent. We don't want weak targets. We want strong targets. We want strong compliance and enforcement. We want information and transparency. And we want an approach where all of government is harmonious and on one page when it comes to climate response. I shall stop sharing.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, I think really puts it in perspective. The last line there made me have a bit of a laugh just because all of government to be in harmonious, kind of just those word harmony and government is just a bit foreign right now. But yeah, before we kind of move on, I popped in the chat the link that Brandon mentioned. So if anyone was interested in learning a bit more, please do go into the link. Once again, here it is. I'll make sure to circulate it with everyone else as well. I see some good conversation happening in the chat as well. Does anyone have any immediate questions and points that they'd like to mention to Brandon? Also, you can come back after breakout rooms and then ask those questions if you have them, but it's sometimes nice to get the immediate kind of what's the first thing popping into your mind, and then going for there. And so, yeah, does anyone have any immediate thoughts that they'd like to kind of put forward? For example, myself, I'd like to just add the more of a like contribution and a bit of a question, Brandon, around the point of kind of vocalizing when you feel as though the translator isn't properly representing what you're saying. I mean, we all saw, I think it was Nelson Mandela's funeral. And that was an hilarious, at least kind of sad, but hilarious situation where a translator was signing something entirely different to what was actually being said. And the broader public didn't know. And there were people in the audience and people watching at home that did recognize what was going on. That's how they were caught out. But it's just, if you are not accurately being portrayed, it's very important that if you want to share in a language that isn't English, it's very important that you do share that way. If you feel as though, hey, that's actually, while English isn't my first language, I can definitely know that what they're saying there does not represent what I'm saying properly. Raise your hand and say, hey, actually, what I meant is this, and speak in the English that you do understand, or ask someone who's near you to help you break it through. Because I think that's a sense of community when we're in these spaces. We have to rely on one another to be able to properly be represented in these spaces. So just the question, Brandon, is that, when you are in that situation and you are hearing something and you know that that's not what someone else is saying and they don't have that, are you allowed as an audience member to just also like, hey, actually, correction, that's not what they're saying?
Absolutely. That's in fact the example I gave earlier. That's what happened because the person was speaking in Chivenda. The translator didn't translate well, and then someone else who was good with Chivenda and English actually raised it. And it's very important because it actually goes into the record that someone had an objection to how they were being translated. It brings into question the whole process, and it will probably make sure that they get a better translator for the next time.
Thank you for that, Brandon. It's also very important to know that because sometimes you might be sitting there and think, oh, but it will be rude if I like raise my hand or say something now, because you're so trained in your mind to believe, no, you've got to sit back and listen to what's being done and follow proper process. But what is proper process and does it benefit you at the end of the day? Is there anyone here that does have any other questions regarding what was being said? And obviously, I think when we go into the breakouts in a moment or so, not right now, immediately, we're going to hear from Wandile now, but once we go into those breakout rooms to kind of develop a few key points, it would be very important for us to just to go in there with a few of what Brandon had mentioned as like guiding points, but not necessarily points that you should go and say in that specific way. And so, yeah, anyone else? I'm going to go quiet and hold space for just anything that needs to come forward. Okay, so there we go. Go for it. Quina,
Sure. Can you hear me?
go for it. I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So my question would be, obviously, when it comes to creating of bills and getting them passed, I think it's a good thing that Brandon spoke about his, or maybe the good relationship that we have maybe with the minister. But who other is sort of like-minded with us to championing this thing of climate change, and what are the other engagements that we've been having, except for commenting and other things, like the conception of the bill itself?
Thank you for that. Brandon, I think maybe I don't want to surmise, but if you need me to, I can. But otherwise, go for it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe you can jump in as well. I mean, it's been a really broad, very multilateral process for some decades already, really picking up in the 2000s, and it happens at all sorts of spaces. So the climate change bill is a very obvious one. But when we engage with other legislation that could have some form of climate impact, right now we some colleagues are working on the upstream petroleum resource development bill. Long name, but really the thing that's going to govern the extraction of oil and gas. But it goes more broadly than that. I mean, at this point, even the Department of Health has a climate and health policy. So almost, especially given the far-reaching nature of climate change and the impacts, it can be woven into almost everything. So we have engagements at all sorts of levels. It's going to happen more and more at local government level as well, especially around adaptation. So, you know, one can go to one's local councillors and say, what are you doing about the climate change bill or the act, and what are you doing about adaptation plans and that sort of thing. So, Quinn, I don't know if that answers your question well, but just to say that it's very broad and it happens at many levels, including engagements with business, for example, other civil society role players that aren't environmentally or climate focused, but start to realize that the impacts will impact the work they do as well. Yeah.
Albert, yes, thank you very much for the answer.
Brilliant. And then I think just looking in the chat. Not a problem, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining when you could. Just wanting to kind of bring forward something that was said earlier. Sorry, in regards to, if I can remember it, I'll pop it out again, and it's kind of just be a good kind of contribution to the space. But it literally slipped my mind as soon as I saw the message pop up in the chat. But it was around it was around engagement and the kind of back and forth of it, and whether or not you'll actually be listened to. There we go. It was the listening thing. It was the going into the meeting with the idea that they are going to be listening to you, and people can listen but not hear you. And so, you know, how, Brandon, my question personally is, do I make sure that what I've said is properly you know, represented in kind of the things out there? You know, can I request to see the minutes after the event has happened? How do I know that what I've actually said in the hour, 2 hours that I spent giving my presentation or writing it up and then presenting for 2 minutes, you know, how do I make sure that my hard work has been properly represented?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, a good facilitator should actually acknowledge what you've said by saying it back to you. And we just had a meeting with Eskom earlier, where that in fact was exactly what was done. It's potentially a very tense meeting, but the facilitator did exactly that. Yeah, it's hard, as you say, to sort of look at someone and say, have you heard me? Will you tell me what I just told you, to test if they're listening? Not that kind of thing doesn't happen. But you know, you can say your thing, and you can end off, for example, by saying, what I'm saying here is really important, and I trust it's going to go on the record, and I would like to see it reflected as such. When one says things like that, it's a little bit bold and can come across even as potentially aggressive, but it's not really. You're just making sure that your democratic right to have input actually has meaning. So you can say that sort of thing, and that's the sort of thing that sometimes makes people stop and listen on that side of the table. They might think, "Ooh, these people are sharp and they're going to check." So let's just make sure we capture their things correctly. And then one can ask the portfolio committee for the record of inputs. So they should publish that once all these hearings have happened. It should be made available. And one could actually go and check them.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions for Brandon right now? Otherwise, I'm going to pass to Wandile and we can get started with just a bit of a breakout and then come back and close before the top of the hour, maybe a few moments before the top of the hour, if need be, just over 1:30. But yeah, before I pass to you, Wandile, I just want to give you the same treatment and put a photo of you on the screen. I think we can all agree that Brandon has helped us see the roadmap of where we find ourselves, where we are right now, where we are moving to, and the goal, the finish line, which is actually, in fact, just the beginning of something entirely new. So, just in having a seat at the table, Wandile Jonas is the ULEAD coordinator, which is a program that the ULEAD initiative coordinator at Project 90 by 2030, which is the youth leadership, climate leadership program at Project 90 by 2030. Wandile has worked with young people for many, many, many years. He himself is still a youth, constitutes as a youth. He just turned 35 recently, and so he's edging his way out of the category of youth in South Africa, but he's still a youth to his heart and to his core. Wandile believes in, as many of us here do, working with young individuals to build their capacity. And he's here to share a little bit about what it means within the work that he does, the importance of young people who have the skills and capacity to act on their futures. Wandile.
Okay, yeah, good evening, everyone. I would like to thank you, Gabe, for the introduction. As he mentioned that my name is Wandile. I am from Khayelitsha in Cape Town. It's always difficult to speak after an expert, eh? So yeah, but
I just want to say something quickly before you go there, Wandile. We are all experts, just in different areas. So go for it.
Okay, thanks, Gabe. Thanks, Gabe. Yes, as Gabe mentioned, I'm also working for Project 90 by 2030 under the ULEAD initiative banner. I've been part of ULEAD for the past 5 years now. Quickly, I'm not gonna take too long of your time. I'm just gonna introduce what I'm doing with the ULEAD initiative. So basically, what we're doing with the ULEAD initiative is we are developing young climate leaders. As we've been doing it for the past years, we've been taking in 40, we call them ULEAD warriors or climate warriors, 40 kids from the age of 14 to 18 years old. What we do there is basically we do workshops around the basics of climate change. So it's a 6 months program, ULEAD Light, and 3 months program, ULEAD Plus, meaning it's 9 months in all. So we're doing basics of climate change, where we do workshops around what are fossil fuels, what do we mean by carbon footprint, when we're talking about alternative energy systems, mostly in renewable energy systems, what are we talking about? So all in all, what we do is that we are trying, as I mentioned before, to develop these young climate leaders to understand what is climate change, what are the sources of energy we can use that are out there, what is activism. So part of activism is that we also run workshops where we teach them about how to use social media, as because we emphasizing that you now are part of our program, and now you are climate leaders and you are also activists. So there are other forms of activism. There's activism as well. There's where you can use social media effectively. in order for you to be an activist. And you know, so yeah, what we're doing then with them is that we do hikes, nature hikes. We call them nature hikes, just for appreciation of in nature. And yeah, but now what we do is that we're working with them for years, and then we also have our alumni. So we have guys that have been traveling around, you know, that comes from the program. One of them would be Ayaka Melitafa. So Ayaka Meli, I used to mentor Ayaka Melitafa on the program. So there's Lisa Kanya, there's Gabriel. Gabriel was part of us as well. So there's a lot of these activists that come from our program. But the problem is that with that now, as facilitators, we are not experts. What we do, as Gabe mentioned, that we are all experts, but in different degrees. But yeah, what we do is we run these workshops, but we get these questions from these kids. Now they're asking us, what now? What do we do? And you're giving us this information, yes, but what do we do with this information? Guys, you can do, you know, be activist online and all of that. But now the question is, I like this space now you have opened about the climate change bill, and because they don't know about those things, they don't know about public participation, that they can be involved in these decision-making processes. So what sits in them is that, what do we do now? So for me, it kind of like when Brendan was speaking, kind of like it gave me, you know, this it opened up something in me, that as much as we're giving out information to these kids, we're facilitating these programs around the climate change, you know, but they want to be involved in some way. Now, how do we unpack it? How can they be involved? So now when Brendan was giving this presentation, it kind of gave me ideas on how I could now go to them and unpack, you know, to them on how they can get involved. So we had a discussion with the warriors last week, where they were asking questions about what I've just said now, and because they've been noticing that the decisions are being made without the youth voices. So it sits with me, and also now that I am being their voice now to this space, in terms of how now they can go about. As Brendan mentioned, that there is dates that are coming for public participation. We've been in one in 2019, but we never got involved into you know 2020, 2021, and you know, because of COVID and some of the things. So I'm not going to take much of the time, because some of the stuff have been mentioned. So also one of the kids told me that, you know, what he's seeing is that South African parliamentarians and also ministers are boardroom leaders. And you know, when he spoke about these boardroom leaders, I was kind of like, because they are not active, they are not out there, they don't come to the people that are affected the most. They sit there and they make decisions without us. So it is now with the platform, it's a good platform that I get this information as well, to take it back. So I'm not going to take too long. I hope I did create a picture of what we're doing in our spaces out there. And then so now I'm in a bigger space where there's people from around the world that they're doing similar work, but we didn't know how we can go about in terms of participating in the decision-making processes. So I'm going to stop there for today. Thank you so much for the platform.
Thank you so much, Mandile. And I think what you're saying about young people not knowing what to do next, after, you know, like, now I've got all these tools, what now? Well, when there's opportunities like the climate change bill consultations that are coming up, it is so important that you engage them. You can't call yourself a change maker and a climate activist, or, you know, an activist, if when opportunities for you to have your voices heard, when they show up, you don't show up. And so this is just me not wanting to guilt trip you, but I brought and I asked Mandile to come and share today, because he's seen many young people kind of come out of the program, you know, not only Project 90s, but other organizations' programs as well. Say, cool, I'm an activist. Hashtag save the planet on social media, and then they move on. You know, when it comes to public participation in their communities, no one is there. No one is actually being, vocalizing the issues that they face, what they want to see in the bills, in the documents that are brought forward for public consultation and participation. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. And one delay starting off saying, well, I'm actually from Kailicha, is because of one of the workshops and one of the consultations that will be happening in Kailicha. I look forward, because I see a few of the ULEAD warriors present here today. I see also quite a few other people that I know are based in Kailicha. I hope that you attend those workshops, those consultative spaces, and you engage our leaders, you engage this document to actively kind of stir up a bit of change. So once again, Wandile, thank you so much for sharing and contributing the importance of not only the build up of the work, but the work that you do once something is finished as well. And that goes for everyone. Once the climate change bill becomes the Climate Change Act, we don't just give up. We've got to make sure that we stand firm and make sure that those processes and procedures that are listed out afterward are actually there, so that we can reach the objectives of the bill, or of the act, rather, shall I say. So yeah, what I'm going to do is put you all in a breakout room for about 10 to 15 minutes. I know, Wandile, your network is a bit fuzzy, so if you do need to jump, you're more than welcome to, but you're more than welcome to stay and engage in the breakout rooms as well. Brandon, it'd be lovely if you could stay on as well, because I know that after this there might be a few individuals, but otherwise, if you do need to jump, you can jump as well. I'm going to put everyone into breakout rooms quickly, and I definitely just want to. Okay, cool. Sianda, I see your hand. And then after just initial questions, put you into breakout rooms so we can begin discussing any other points that you would like to kind of raise, and ways that you want to raise it, or what you would like people in South Africa right now, if you aren't in South Africa, what you want people in South Africa to kind of raise in those spaces. Like, hey, actually, that would affect what we're facing over here in Lesotho, or hey, this is what affecting people here in Botswana, or whatever and whatever. So yeah, Sianda, go for it. Perhaps network is not. There we go. Go for it.
Did you allow me to speak, Gabriel?
Yes, I did. Go for it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sianda Njangase. I'm currently based in Devon, and I work for the South African Red Cross Society. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to our host, Mr. Brendan, and then to Wandile as well for sharing. I have a point that I would love to share with you guys. I must say that there is nothing important than community engagement, and we have seen currently that disasters are becoming more frequent due to climate change crisis, because there's been an increase in heat waves, in droughts, and floods, even in food insecurity, because climate change affects a lot of people. So therefore, and I've been seeing throughout this whole engagement that a lot of people are asking, okay, fine, we are broadcasting the information out there with regards to climate change, but how are we actually ensuring that the information that we're broadcasting is implemented? Because it's very important that we do not just document whatever that it's related to an issue, but we need to go beyond, make sure that it's being implemented. What it's being said is it's really being done. For example, we can have workshops about climate change, but how can we make it effective? So I was thinking that we should make our workshops practical. Like, we can actually speak about climate change, what it affects, what does it do, how can we eliminate it from the community that we live in. For example, we can have a talk.
Oh, Sianda, I think you muted yourself there.
And then, like, within the talks that we have, for example, we can go to where the talk is, like pick up papers, and like we can teach them that they can actually recycle from those papers. They're actually like contributing into eliminating climate change by picking up papers, like everything, basically all the material out there, and they can actually make like a living from doing that. Because, for example, from plastic they can make skipping ropes, we can target like crashes, we can sell those skipping ropes. That's sorry. And then we can also, like, from the plastic bottles, make a plant, like plant pots, contributing into like making something useful out of like eliminating climate change. And as we all know, is that like trees and plants contributing to eliminating climate change, because they absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So by us having the talks and making people like being able to be creative out of ways that they actually do into eliminating climate change, I think it's one way that we can actually make sure that we're being effective in broadcasting information about climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sianda. I think what you've had to offer to the group is so valuable and so rich. It highlights the importance of community engagement, community participation, consultation, and not just with government, but with each other in between the times that the public participation with government isn't there. Brandon, I see you. Go for it.
Thanks, Gabriel, and thanks, Sianda, for that. I think you are, yeah, as I agree with Gabriel, what you've said there is so very important. Like the first step is to understand climate change, for example. And then the next step is to tell the people around you, so that then there's not just you, but there's a bunch of you. And then the next step from that is the act of citizenship. If 200 of you demanded a meeting with the ward councillor and said, what are you doing to get us ready for the next floods or the next drought? It's going to be very powerful compared to you doing that on your own. So educating the people around you so that you can get a big, strong voice, and then go and put the pressure on. And something like the bill, these hearings is an opportunity where they invite us to consult with them, but we can invite ourselves. You know, we, at the end of the day, elect these people who are answerable to us, so we can demand to meet them and say, this is the problem, what are you doing about it? And if they come with vague answers, you put on more pressure and you say, well, when is it going to be done by? Who's doing it? Who can we keep liaising with? Who's going to meet with us next month to check on progress?
Thanks, Ben. I like that who and when. The transparency of this all is so important as well. It's not just about following up, it's about continuing to monitor and see what's happening as we move. Just looking at the time, I'm going to put everyone into just breakout rooms quickly. If anyone has any just thoughts about what they've heard Brandon say, it doesn't have to be anything too structured. I'm going to share my screen again just so you can kind of see the gist of what we're doing in these breakout rooms now. It's so taking into account everything that has been shared so far by Brandon, by Wandile, by myself, by Sianda, by anyone in the chat. In breakout rooms, identify talking points that you or others could make in upcoming public consultation spaces on the climate change bill. But it can also be regarding any other form of public consultation, and I'd love to hear that as well. So you're going to all have about 5 to 10 minutes, just depending on what everyone's feelings are. So probably 10 minutes just to discuss in these spaces, just feelings even about what you've heard today, about what your thoughts on public consultation is, what public consultation means to you, and how you wish to use it going forward. Because sometimes, it's very difficult to kind of engage a topic, especially if this is the first time you've heard about it. And so, yeah, I'm going to pop you all into breakout rooms, and then we'll touch base in about 10 minutes at 22. Come back for a little bit of a kind of resharing, and then a close with next steps of how we're going to move forward. We have about a month and a half before a month and 10 days, a month and 6 days, I don't know, a month and 6 days or something like that, until the public consultation in Western Cape, but far less time until the other provincial consultations as well that's going on. And so a reminder of those times when you come back as well. Brandon, I'll ask you to share your screen when everyone comes back, just for a refresher of those dates and when those are happening. I see people who had fallen off are joining back in now because load shedding has kicked them back. So excellent. I'm going to open those breakout rooms and we'll go from there. So I wish I had recorded that, but I'll reach out to you personally, Justin, to get that quote so I can make sure it's properly added and reflected in the kind of summary of this session. But yeah, it's just a massive welcome back, and thank you all for kind of giving your time so far. I'm not going to ask for much more of it, but what I would love is if we could hear from group one, and I'm going to mention the name of someone who is in group one, and you're more than welcome to then jump up and say, hey, that was me. So group one had Ruth, Lena, John, Hudson, Felix, Andrea, and in it. And so if anyone from group one would like to just give like a very short share back of what they were discussing, that would be amazing. If not, it's also fine.
On group one, we're discussing about the bill, whereby we're looking about how the bill will be implemented. If there will be some amendments, who will be responsible for taking those amendments, as we are aware that Parliament will be part of it, and has some international organizations that are also working on climate change issues as the world is concerned. In addition to that, we have again digitalization development that is taking place. So we are discussing that issue on our table. And we end up that we need to be just assume that everything will be okay. That was our discussion as so far that I want to share with the group.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Edson. I think those kind of reassurance points of like wanting to make sure that things are okay, and hearing that, but also doing it so that you can make sure things are all okay. It's brilliant to hear, as well as what you said in regards to just the discussion of the importance of bills like this. I'm assuming if given more time, you might have gone into depth about other kind of climate and social justice policies that would be there to protect us and understanding how we can engage in those spaces. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to be a toolkit. Cool. Thank you, group one, for that. Group two had Bertha, Caitlin, Diana, Lydia, Pauline, and Celine in it. So does group two want to perhaps share with us what was discussed? We've got a shy group.
So we were just kind of talking about the importance of this kind of conversation in an African context, and how most of the discourse in the media is generally about like the global north, and these types of meetings and conversations are so important, especially just to get an entrance into government and have our say. And then we also just mentioned the importance of also, again, in an African context, the importance of just education and building from the ground up.
Thank you for that. And I think when we talk about ground up, we talk about grassroots kind of popular education. I think that's what we heard we heard Sianda mentioning earlier, is, the importance of, if I know something, I share it, then you share it. Eventually, there's a group of us ready to act. And a way that we can fasten or make that process a lot faster is if there's a workshop or a few other kind of educational spaces where people can learn it without you having to champion it on your own. So yeah, I think those are really important, especially on the context of Africa, in its broadness and in the different regions. And also going forward, by the way, for anybody, and I've mentioned this at the beginning of the year, if there are any other climate or social justice policies and more that you would like us to, at African Climate Alliance, to engage and help you break down for any submissions coming up for you all across the rest of the continent, not just in South Africa, please do let us know. Please shoot me a message. Please just flag it with us, and we can do our best to help build capacity for consultation for those engagements as well. We'd love to continue building that. We're trying to engage a group of people from Malawi in the kind of light of what's been going on recently, especially since the devastation of Cyclone Freddy, and how people can engage loss and damage and adaptation around that. But yeah, thank you, Group 2, for that, for those contributions and sharings. From Group 3, we had quite a few more people there, but I see they've all dropped because it's probably load shedding. But we had Brandon, Mtebi, Nadine, and Natasha. Is anyone from Group 3 wanting to share just a bit of reflection, small reflection about what was said before we pass to Brandon to show us once again the dates, and then I'll bring us to a close.
Good evening, Gabriel. So we had the secretary. So I don't know if she's still in the call. If she's not, if she is, she could kindly unmute herself, then give us represent us.
Hi, Natasha. Yes, I'm here. Sorry, it took me a while to find the button.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So in our group, it was only Natasha talking. To be honest, I just joined in because I find the topic interesting. But basically what Natasha said was so interesting. She said SA has a climate bill, Zambia doesn't. I'm not too sure about Kenya, where I live. So, and she said, basically a bill can make space for regulations, and it should hold people accountable. For example, the burning of plastic. So how do you go around to hold people accountable, and how do you even communicate to let people know that it's not great for our environment?
Thank you for that, Nadine. And I'm kind of glad to hear that there's already kind of like a bit of a mapping of what is said there. Also, I find it quite funny that there was a small little kind of people's conference happening over there. Someone was named the secretary, and someone was named the chair, and they just it was brilliant.
Yes, Gabriel. And then the other thing, Gabriel, that our able secretary has missed out is that we also, I don't know if I could say I or we, because Brandon was also is actually in the room. Yes. So one of the other points that I had talked about was worries on how we could actually have the bill taken to Parliament. We actually have a draft of the climate bill. I personally have it. I have a copy of it, and we've tried to reach out to the lawmakers to say that, okay, this is what we want. We have a draft. Here's the draft. Take a look at it, and if possible, take it to Parliament. Let it be discussed, and later onwards, hopefully, have it passed out or passed on. Like it should be a law on its own. So that's one of the things that our secretary missed out. I don't know.
Thanks for that, Natasha.
Meetings are new. Azinanga watu.
Diana, would you like to say something?
No, sorry.
Oh, not a problem. Cool. So on that note, what I'm going to do is just share my screen, because Brandon, as always, on top of it all, has already sent me the presentation, which I'll make sure to get to you all as well. and show you the dates for the what is it called? Consultations. That's what we're here for, guys. Sorry, it's late. And so on the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd of April, in the Eastern Cape province, you will see these are the different district municipalities and times for the different consultations. On the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th of May, in the Free State province, you will see the dates and times and the areas for these consultations to happen. Northern Cape province on the 12th, the 13th, and 14th of May, times and areas listed as well. In Western Cape, 19 May, 20 May, 21 May, and that times and more listed as well. And so just a mention to these things is that we still have more than enough time to co-create some more talking points for you to develop talking points and have them kind of like, does this make sense, guys? And, discuss with one another about that and properly have your voices heard in those spaces. So once again, Brandon, thank you so much for all your contribution today. The high level, the low level, the technical, the grassroots, the everything. We appreciate it as always at African Climate Alliance. And I'm sure we all here are very grateful for Brandon as well. Thank you. And then for Wandile, who I know isn't here, just once again, thank you to you for your contributions to the space today, showing us the importance of youth not just staying activists, but taking action when opportunities for engagement come forward. And to everybody else who's made time and effort to be here today, thank you for putting the future of, not only the future, the present and the future of us and those to come at the core of your kind of work and importance. It is so important that we work together, that we build knowledge and co-create and share things together. And as we move forward, I'll make sure to circulate these informations again. I'm going to put in the chat one last time the link to the website that Brandon mentioned earlier, which is a tool for the climate change bill. I'll also pop into the chat a link of a year for the data reimbursement in case you didn't get it. Once again, thank you so much, and I hope that you have a good night. Goodbye.